So Lee, we're just back really from Medine World Cup Classic.
Yep.
One of these enormous French venues.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, thousands and thousands of acres. You're fishing right at the horizon. Mainline braid.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I used years ago, to be honest with you, and I was sold on it. I mean, it absolutely. I mean, at the time, I thought it was like using a new rig because there's no stretching braid whatsoever. When a fish picks up your bait, it gets the resistance from your end tackle and your rod and reel and everything. The main advantage with braid is because for its breaking strain, it's extremely fine diameter, so you can use in this case 18-pound braid, which is about the thickness of an 8-pound mono. So obviously casting is really good, and fishing the big French waters, where your boating baits out 250 metres, 400 metres even. I mean, because there's no stretch, it's such an advantage. You're instant contact with the fish, and bite indication is a lot better. The main disadvantage of a lot of braids is they float, which is fine if you're fishing over obstacles and everything, but really, in the ideal situation, you want it to sort of sink down to the lake bed, and this one's perfect. I mean, the material it's made of, by its nature, it does actually float. So the only way they can make it sink is weave an absorbent material within it, so when it gets wet, it does go down. Yeah. But in a lot of cases, it then becomes too thick. Whereas this is, it's got the absorbent material in it, but it's still quite nice and thin, so you can still cast it a long way. And I actually think you get more bites because of it. I mean, another big advantage with braid as well is fishing against snags. I mean, because there's no stretch, there's no chance of the fish, getting. I mean, you provide you on the ball, with a rod. Yeah. There's no way the old fish are getting the snags. But I'm sold on the stuff.
And Steve, taking braid further with Ultima products is the Spod and marker, which we talked about launching when we did the Power Carp DVD. Yeah. That's now been on the market a year. I mean, I've been using it and perfect for what I've been doing.
I mean, it's very similar to what Lee was saying about braids. Obviously, this is slightly different, but when you're marker floating, you want to know every single detail that you're fishing over. So if you're trying to find a mussel bed, you can actually feel it, and it transmits back through the rod, through your hands, and you can feel, if you're using nylon, by the time you've pulled it and the stretch, let's say you're 120 yards out, you've pulled over your mussel bed, great, I'm fishing over the top of it, you're not. It's sprung back, you're pulling miles off it. It's just a lot more efficient, when you're marker floating, knowing what you're fishing over with braid. And obviously, because of the diameter, like Lee was saying, you can put this extreme distances. Most of the time, in most circumstances, you can put your spod and marker further than you can your main rods, which isn't a bad thing, because you don't want to be fishing further than where you don't know what you're fishing over. So I mean, I always use I use a 20-pound variety, have done for the last sort of year and a half, but I use, in conjunction with it, the Power Braid shock leader. I don't use a finger stool, just literally whip on about 4 or 5 turns onto the reel of that, straight onto the spod or the marker, onto the braid, and then you've got, that takes up an awful lot of the pressure. I wouldn't actually fish the 20-pound variety straight through, because it will cut your finger. Say it's only 4 or 5 turns, literally. You don't have to worry where the knot is on the spool. Cast it out, and it's it goes out exactly the same as as if you're fishing the braid straight through. So
and it's going to take all the shock out of the cast. Repeated casting for
especially spodding. I mean, I use the same. I use like the Shimano Spod rod, and I use that for my marker rod as well. So it's a 7.5 pound test rod. But yeah, so when you're whacking that, you actually lose how firm that rod is. Yeah. So the initial inertia of the first cast, this will take up, that will take up all the stresses and the strains that you need to, and I mean, I haven't changed mine for a year and a half. Yeah. Never snapped off. Never,
one thing we haven't mentioned as well. I mean, obviously you're using a spod and a marker rod a lot more than you're using your fishing rods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so line twist is not a problem with braid, is it?
No,
Which is
exactly.
one. If you're using mono, you'd be suffering.
Yeah, sure.
Hell of a problem with line.
Well, yeah.
twist.
I mean, I always used to use that, Lee, and you come in, you'd have to grab hold of the lead and watch the float go spin round and round and round. Yeah. You don't have to do that with right. Braid. So, from that side of it, I've never used braid as a mainline.
Right.
The first time I used braid, one of my mates said, "Have a cast with that," and I was a bit anti it, like you do, you get stuck in your ways as an angler. He forgot to tell me it was clipped up, and this is how responsive it is. I whacked it. It was clipped up about 60 yards, and it pulled the rod out my hands. Yeah. That's how responsive it is, you know. So
I've sold it. I mean, the first time I used it, I made a tremendous catch, and for the time, I just couldn't believe it. You could actually, when you pulled it back, your end tackle back, you could feel like a leaf hook on your hook. You know, it was so responsive. Then I gave it to a mate of mine who he tried it. He said, "I can't use this." I said, "Why?" He said, "I can feel too much." You know, I knew what he meant. You know,
whether they're mainline, Spod and marker, they're definitely part of the carp fishing.
And now are more expensive, but they just don't wear out, do they?
No,
the colour might fade a little bit, but
so they're real value for money as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think once you've invested, you know, you're looking at one spool for your Spod and marker rod, and that you don't have to replace that for years. No. You know, Ultima, we do actually look for improving things. We're looking at different profiles of the braid and colours and whatever. But that's, yet again, we're gonna work on that over the next year and see if we can come up with